Yeah, I'm good. What? Were you
Okay.
calling my name?
Yeah.
Oh,
You have
okay.
bad connection?
Yeah, let me try to get closer to my Wi-Fi.
Okay. Just let me know when you're ready.
All right, I should be good now. If I have more like issues, I'll let you know.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll be looking at the chat, so if you have issues, just type something. So for the reference of the audience, I'll read the topic. The topic is military conscription is unjust. And by military conscription, that's been defined as mandatory enlistment into the military. DJ is prop and Neon's op. Um, yeah, I think that's it. Do you guys have any questions before we start?
No, ma'am.
Nope.
Great. Okay, let me pull up a timer. Um, since Landon's begging me to wait for him, Landon, are you good? I think he wants to record or something. Okay, great. So since DJ's prop, he's gonna have the first speech. You're gonna have a 5-minute opening statement. You can, let me help Jacob. Someone help Jacob. Can you hear now, Jacob? Can you hear now? I guess not. Can someone in the chat just help Jacob, please? Yeah, I think he's gonna go on his computer. Okay, with that, I think we're gonna start. So, DJ, you have the first speech. The 5 minutes. I'll have a timer up, but I'm not gonna like give you time warnings. So you should also probably time yourself. I'm only gonna cut you off if you go over the time. Yeah, I think that's it. You can start on your first word.
Roger that. Well, thank you everyone for turning up to the debate. Thank you, Bobo, for hosting. I'm very excited to discuss this topic of military conscription with my friend Neon. Just to be clear, we are debating the phenomenon of inscription, where a person is in fact required or it's mandatory for them to enlist in military. This is not a situation where they could get out of it. So I want to make that clear from the outset. And so just to be clear, enlistment into the military obviously comes with a number of hazards. Obviously, there could be like loss of life, the primary hazard of active combat. Um, in addition to that, there's a just a widespread report across the world, particularly in America. Something like 60% of all active duty combatants have at least one, if not more, mental health diagnoses after combat, and that's from the U.S. military health system official stats just from 2020. And so we're talking about a subject with as much as it is abstract for us in a sense. This issue, being moral or not, has tremendous consequences in practice, and I will get into how some nations have tried to acknowledge these moral difficulties and have sort of tried to soften them, and essentially. So in most nations, primarily in the West, we've got this idea enshrined to our constitutions that freedom is important, right? The Declaration of Independence famously cites liberty as the first thing of importance after life itself. So you've got life, liberty, and then the pursuit of happiness, right? So this idea of personal freedom is very enfranchised in virtually all governments on some level, and we'll see later that the governments that are most hostile to personal freedom are the ones that have the most draconian draft measures and require the conscription of even women, which I'm sure is something else we'll talk about. And so it can't be denied that mandatory enlistment in the military is an infringement of personal liberty, and it's therefore no surprise that virtually all Western nations have done away with the practice of mandatory conscription since World War II. There's a list of nations that have just done away with that, and that's in spite of all the wars that continue to rage since World War II. And so I think it's relevant that the only Western nations that still do the majority of mandatory conscription are those with the lowest populations. We're talking about 10 million and under. I wasn't able to find a country that was higher than that inscripts. And that's kind of like a practical sort of metrics based, almost like a pragmatic thing. And so, and also, regardless of your opinion on whether women should or should not be involved in combat, there's no doubt that conscription targets, historically and in modern times, 97% of cases are men. And so there's a clear disparity between men and women, showing that there's something unjust if the society affirms that women should be allowed in combat, which, of course, that hasn't been the case even in America for just about 10 years. It's only been about 10 years since women could actually serve in combat roles here in America. And so that was settled in a 2013 National Coalition for Men versus Selective Service. Huge case that really changed the tone and discussion, at least in America. And I know this is definitely an abstract concept. Every nation sort of has a position on this, so we want to eventually talk about that. But something I want to mention is that modern warfare is largely clandestine, and history continues to teach us this. So even with Iraq, with the imaginary weapons of mass destruction, the whole world was promised that there was a just war happening. There were closed door meetings happening all across the world then and now that influence military policy, and citizens rarely have the information they need to even decide if the war that they're going to compete in or participate in is just for themselves. They simply do not have access to the information. So gone are the days of gathering with your compatriots to defend your nation in a straightforward manner against a clear threat. The modern war on terrorism is a great example of this. When the world or the West declares war on an idea instead of a people group or a nation, we can see the blowback and the sad story that has occurred since that. I don't think anybody's happy with that. And so generally, I'm going to be defending this. I'm going to be opposing military conscription based on personal liberty. There will be other things I bring up in cross-examination and follow-up reports. But yeah, there's no doubt that military conscription is just a fundamental infringement on personal liberty. Most Western nations are built upon natural law. This is an intuition I trust everyone will sort of become aware of as we debate.
All right, that's time. Good job. Before we go into Neon, he said that parts of it he was lagging for. Neon, like were you able to hear the end? Like which parts did you miss?
Like right in the middle, like it cut out and I couldn't hear.
Remember what the last thing you heard was before it cut out?
No, it like cut out and my audio kind of glitched out, so I didn't. It was like right in the middle. He said, I think he said something about he was getting into the war.
10-second summary. Basically, I'm advocating for the infringement of personal liberty as a real fundamental part of my argument, as well as there are some disparities. If your nation considers men and women to be equals and have a right to combat roles, I think there's a clear injustice and disparity between men and women in combat roles in terms of who's conscripted and who's not. It's something like 95% men versus 5% women. So there's obviously a injustice there if you think women should be in combat.
Yeah, I just for your reference, Neon, I wrote down 4 main arguments. So just so you don't miss them. I wrote down 1, hazards of combat, 2, personal liberty infringement, 3, gender disparity, and 4, lack of transparency. Did you get all that?
Yeah, gotcha.
Great. Okay. So now will be your speech. You have a 5-minute opening statement. I'll start the time on your first word. And if it happens again, just type in chat and I'll stop and fix it for you.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, yeah. So first, I just want to say thank you for hosting. Thank you for setting all this up. It's really entertaining, really fun. Thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, the topic at hand, military conscription being whether just or unjust. I'm taking the opposition to DJ by saying that this is going to be a just and necessary institution that we must uphold. And the reason why I'm going to uphold this is because it's going to be a couple of factors. I view that the consequences of not having said institution is going to be a net negative to the overall flourishment of our society and of our people, along with like the variety of benefits that do concur or do occur from this institution, therefore being instilled, is going to outweigh this infringement of a liberty that we might see, right? When we talk about situations of like abroad or situations of domestic warfare, we're going to have to acknowledge and analyze like whether or not like liberty is going to supersede our defense and our commitment to one another in our society and commitment to protecting one's actual liberties. That liberties are only going to be obtained through force, obtained through protection of our society. And I'm going to point this out in many of the conversation that we have today, that while liberty is important to uphold, it's necessary to force people to serve and force people to help provide for this. Therefore, that liberty can remain instilled in many facets. And when we talk about, for example, other things such as negatives that could be like mental health, we'll acknowledge like, while this may be true, it's statistically insignificant to other factors that may vary. So with that being said, I'm ready to get into the argument here and ready to get into the cross exam. So I'm going to yield the rest of my time.
Great. Just give me 1 second to finish writing. Okay. So now is going to be 5 minutes of cross for each person. Since DJ went first, he's going to go first. So right now would be the time for DJ to ask his questions and Neon to answer them. I'll start the timer on your first word.
Thank you. Neon, first question is, would you personally rather fight alongside 3 recruits of average ability from your country's National Guard or 3 random conscripts of average ability?
Yeah, I would fight alongside anyone. Doesn't matter if they're like recruits or if they're just random citizens, because I don't think that matters to me.
So you have no preference in that situation?
Not at all. No.
Okay. Do you think it's fair to compel individuals to serve in the military against their will?
Absolutely.
Why then do you think it's a widespread phenomenon that virtually all countries that even have a conscription service allow for the phenomenon of conscientious objection?
I think it's going to be because of this like idea or conception of like um, free will or like liberty to choose, right? Objection is going to be like you have this idea that you can oppose something, right? But objection is only circumstantial at best.
Thank you.
Um,
So next question is, so it sounds like you're sort of admitting that these nations are actually making an allowance for personal judgment, which is sort of like a tacit confession that it would be unjust to compel them against their will. Is that right or wrong?
I wouldn't say necessarily that's correct. No.
Okay, yeah. So you did cite personal liberty as a reason for that existing. I would grant you that, as well as sort of religious and pacifistic sort of philosophical objections. And so, um, are you aware that the only countries that do not allow for conscientious objection are basically 5 of the most draconian governments in the world?
Such as.
Talking about Turkey, I have a list of them I can find you. Basically, the ones that score lowest on the personal liberty indexes, which I do have for anyone who would like to see that. The nations that score absolutely worst on personal liberty are the ones who don't have any allowance for people to get out of this issue of conscience, which I believe is the whole world sort of testifying to what people have as an intuition that forcing someone against their will to risk life and limb is fundamentally wrong. Let me try to phrase that in the form of a question. So, shouldn't individuals have the right to choose their own path in life, including whether or not to enlist in the military?
Should they have the individual choice? Can you rephrase the question just a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just repeat it. So, shouldn't individuals have the right to choose their own path in life, including whether or not to enlist in military?
Um, no, generally speaking, no.
Okay, could you give a reason for that?
Yeah, because I think that there's going to be obligations that we must uphold, that individuals must uphold toward their community and society.
Okay, so do you generally support or generally not support the notion of bodily autonomy?
I don't even know whether this exists or not. So generally, no, I don't support this.
Okay, so the notion in common parlance is going to be the right of an individual to choose what happens to or with their body, whether it's medical, sexual ethics, military enlistment, etc. Using the general concept of that, would you generally favor or disfavor?
From a moral standpoint, I would generally disfavor this when it
So
comes to
you
like
would
the sorry,
okay.
when it like finish the answer, just to when it comes to like the concept of like obligations and responsibilities, I generally disfavor this.
Okay. All right. And so, on what basis are you grounding these responsibilities, these moral responsibilities that transcend the right of personal liberty?
To put it blatant, be like to the point, I think when we talk about obligations, I'm grounding this in the need and the necessity for flourishment of one's society and one's people.
Would you agree that generally Western governments allow folks to object to the enlistment of or conscription on moral and grounds of justice?
Repeat that. You cut out a little bit.
Sorry. So, would you agree that Western governments, the ones that are
Hello.
typically built on like natural law and liberty, are the only ones that support
Neon, can you hear him?
this?
I paused the
Sorry.
time. Give him a second.
Yeah, no problem.
Can you hear him now, Neon?
Are you speaking? Hello.
Yeah, testing, testing.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah,
hear me?
Hold on.
yeah, yeah. Can you repeat that question? You cut out.
Yeah, so I'll phrase
Okay,
it
you're
this way. Why do you think it is that the nations that score highest on the Personal Liberty Index allow for the most exceptions to military conscription?
I think there's going to be other factors that go into play here. I don't think it's specifically just correlated to this.
Could you give a couple of those factors or even one?
Yeah, I could give a couple of those factors. For example, if we talk about countries like Western countries that score higher on like this Liberty Index, it's going to be because like a more of a generalized freedom notion of like other factors in society, right? Not just corresponding to like forced conscription. If we talk about a country, for example, like Israel, right? Israel has like a more of a higher Liberty Index. However, they also have conscription. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure it's like at 18 you have to serve in the military for at least a minimum of 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. But they're still fairly high on like the Liberty Index.
That'll be time. Okay, great. So now is going to be Neon asking DJ his questions, and DJ is going to be answering. You have 5 minutes, and I'll start the time on your first word.
Yeah. So DJ, when we talk about liberty, I'm curious. Do you believe liberty is an absolute right?
Absolute what? Sorry.
An absolute right.
Liberty being an absolute right. You'd have to define liberty for me to answer that.
Liberty just going to be like generalized freedom of expression, freedom of choice.
I would not. No, there are definitely exceptions like inciting a riot and things like that that I would support an infringement of liberty, but those tend to be areas of protecting life, whereas I would see the draft as endangering life.
Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying that. So we agree that it's not an absolute based on the definition I've given. So you agree that circumstances are going to uphold that we can infringe liberty for the standard of protecting life, correct?
Yeah, like I said, life, liberty. So life being first. Anything that's going to aim to protect life, I'm going to support as sort of an area where we can quibble about the absoluteness of liberty.
Okay. And military conscription, just being like mandatory service for one's military, is this just going to be for out of 18, or would you hold that the draft, for example, is going to be a perfect example of this?
The draft is definitely an example of conscription.
Okay, okay, cool, cool. So when I make this argumentation, I want to clarify for you that I'm not saying I'm not necessarily agreeing, or I do agree, but I'm not saying that we should instill mandatory service right after 18. What I would support is the draft. Um, I think that we should force people into the draft, both men and women, because I hold women and men to be equal. When you talk about disparities, I'm curious, what statistics are you going to be um, pointing out or citing that sort of like disparities in military service?
Yeah, so there's a really large study done by Pew Research that documented the countries that have conscription currently, and most of them exclude women in general. And so there's a lot of countries with active conscription. There aren't as many actually. There's more that don't have them than do, which I found to be interesting. But of the ones that do, they largely do not involve women.
Okay, cool, cool. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Also, another question I have for you is: you said that there's going to be an increased risk to what I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong. Suicidal ideation or suicidal attempts. Is that what you cited earlier?
Actually, no. There's a tremendous amount of mental health diagnoses with the military. So something like 60% of active military have at least one. Many have multiples. Like there's like 43% have more than one, and then these can sort of be a spectrum of alcoholism to suicide proper or suicidal tendencies.
Okay, cool, cool. Thank you for clarifying that. What's the statistical like difference in number between like non-combatants and combatants, service members?
Yeah, I was only interested in active combat because that's the only time a draft is going to be invoked is if there's an active combat. Someone basically an active combat scenario is likely. So that's yeah. I didn't look at the data for the non-combatants because frankly I don't think that's pertinent. Obviously no one's going to object to someone serving in a role that doesn't endanger them, which of course doesn't really exist in the military. Even the sort of far away things you could be targeted by a nuke or something like that.
Yeah. So just to be clear, you didn't take a look at the statistics when it comes to non-combatants, only combatants.
Correct. Again, the principle I'm going with is life is fundamental, like the protection of that, and so I'm mostly concerned with things that are going to risk danger to life.
Okay. Well, if that's the general notion, then I do have a question for you. When we talk about conscription, we talk about the draft. Would you say that violating the liberty is going to be necessary if we have a situation where we have a massive army, and this massive army is going to be very large, far larger than what we have currently, right? And we know that these people, this army, has a tendency when they invade countries to rape, torture, and slaughter like their citizens of the countries they invade. Now, the only way to like one of the best ways to deter this would be to force people, both men and women, to fight. Would you think that this is going to be substantial or sufficient to force people if we knew that this was going to occur?
My broader position on that would be if you're comparing military sizes, and in order to even out the disparity in numbers in such a short time frame, you've essentially already lost the war, and your military services failed you in preparing your nation for that.
We'll pause the time for him. Are you good, Neon?
Yeah, can you repeat the answer to that question? You cut out like right when you were about to start.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
in the
ahead. Go
hypothetical
ahead.
situation where you're sort of counting the numbers and sort of trying to like even out like a massive disparity of combat ready troops versus a military that needs to draft a lot of people just to build that disparity up. The war is essentially over at that point, and I think that's why we haven't really seen that happen in practice, where a huge disparity is ever bridged with the draft. There's only relatively reasonable disparities in those situations.
It would be time. Okay. So right now would be a 2-minute optional prep time. Do you guys want it or do you want to move on?
I'll take it.
Okay. So I'll start the time for 2 minutes. I'll give you a warning when there's 1 minute left. The time is going to start now. One minute left. And that's time. Okay. So, DJ, you're gonna have a 4-minute rebuttal speech. This is where you can respond to your opponent's arguments, build up your own, stuff like that. Time will start on your first word.
Thank you again. So far, my opponent in this debate has said that conscription is just and necessary, and that not having it is a net negative to society. We have yet to hear any real substantiation of that, other than a couple of philosophical soft points. I'd argue that the burden of proof when you're actually going to send somebody potentially to their death and probably sentence them to a life of mental illness, you really need more than sort of these nebulous, philosophical points. I will say, I don't think Neon addressed my first question in cross X, because it does really play to the intuition that most people have. Would you rather fight alongside 3 recruits, right? These are National Guard recruits who have done some training of average ability versus 3 random conscripts of average ability? We're not talking about disabled people, but just like average versus average. I think everyone's intuition is like, I would rather be surrounded by people who know what's going on, who have actually planned this to be a part of their life, rather than uh, being involved in this conflict ad hoc. I will say, just with the Ukraine and Russia war, we've seen an absolute massive amount of footage of people fighting in combat. And there have been cases where conscripts behave in combat differently than you would like them to. There was a trench warfare video where a guy was basically cowering into the side, and this other dude had to sort of single handedly fend off a Russian unit, which he did so valiantly. But you have a lot of instances of people reporting that their conscripted comrades just aren't reliable in war because it's not in their heart. In fact, I think it's really interesting that the Bible, of all places, in the Holiness Code, which people really dislike in our time, has a provision to allow people who are not ready for war. It says, if you are fearful of war, go back home. We don't want you. So even the archaic sort of ancient Near East military code has this allowance for people to get out, even if they're just afraid. Because we don't want cowards on the battlefield. People who haven't signed up for this should not be required to do it. And I don't think we have a case in history where a nation has lost a war because they couldn't conscript enough people. Obviously, boots on the ground do a lot to win a war, but it's not untrained boots on the ground that do much for a war. It's the people who are actually giving themselves over to a life of service voluntarily that are going to actually put their heads up, over over the trench and march to what seems to be certain death. And frankly, the people who are not signing up for that, you can't really rely on them. And so the idea that conscription is okay because the ends justify the means, it really that hasn't been proven for sure. We have no data on that from Neon yet. But I would argue that everyone's intuition tells them that no, you throw a bunch of people randomly at a problem, and you're just going to make the problem worse. You're not going to actually. There's not going to be any life saved. There's actually just going to be more life lost, and you're going to have to waste resources to outfit and re-outfit and re-outfit, which we see the sort of attrition that's facing Russia these days. And so I'll yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Neon, you're gonna have a 4-minute rebuttal speech. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so hello, can you guys hear me? I got a phone call,
Yeah,
sorry.
you're good.
Okay. Yeah, so just to be clear, when it comes to what I've said so far, um, you your argumentation, right? And I did answer your question, I'm fairly positive. We could always go back over that in the cross exam, but you also didn't answer my question earlier. When you made your argumentation, you also cited that it's okay to violate liberties if it's to protect life. You would hold this to be more value. In my argumentation, I posited the idea that what conscription will do, at least in the case of the draft, is protect life, generally speaking, by violating liberties. So this meets your standard. But I do want you to answer my question in the cross exam about the if we have this sufficient army, or if we have this army, is it sufficient that we could force people to go in? You did say that conscription, if we have to conscript, we've already lost a war. Well, that's not necessarily the case, if we look at situations like World War II, where we did conscript, we did some conscription to people for the war, and we actually did win the war, right? We had the numbers and we won the war, even if it means sacrificing many lives. We were able to overcome a really bad evil in this world. So that's not necessarily true. And just because something hasn't happened yet, it's still not. It's still logically possible, right? That this can occur and that it's going to be necessary. So I like a response to that when you do. But I think a little bit has been just like a little bit of this jibber jabber has just been incoherent. But I'll yield my time on that.
Okay. So now is going to be 3 minutes of cross this time. It'll start with DJ having 3 minutes to ask Neon his questions. After the 3 minutes, it'll swap and Neon can ask DJ his questions. DJ, I'll start the time on your first word. Go ahead.
Thank you. Neon, do you have any rough idea of the amount of conscripted fighters were involved in World War II on your nation's side? You are muted if you did not know.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
just
You cut out a little bit,
To fix that, I'm going to restart the time. You can restate your question.
please.
Going to restart my timer 1 second. Okay, yeah, the question was, do you have any data or can you provide us with any metrics about how many people were conscripted from your nation in World War II?
On how many were conscripted, just drafted? About 10 million people, just about.
Okay, and do you have an idea of the total Axis forces that were needed? Like, what amount needed to be drafted to basically achieve equilibrium?
As to how many people were needed to be drafted to meet like the amount of life that was being lost, is that what you're asking?
Well, first of all, I want to ask you the source of your 10 million number.
Yeah, the source of my 10 million number.
Yeah,
Is that
you
what
got
you're
that?
asking? Yeah, it's gonna be from the National World War II Museum. I can give you like it's a .org site.
Okay. So 10 million drafted, and that's presumably over the entire course of the war. Obviously, America wasn't involved that long, but I would argue that in order for that metric to be relevant, you'd also need to know how many the Axis forces had, and what the disparity really is. Because you did make a point that you try to make the point about conscription. Let me try to frame this as a question. Um, all right. So, would you agree that just because something hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean we don't have sufficient data to make a point? So, we've had a lot of wars, right, in history, tons of them that we can look back to. And as far as I know, no one's ever said a war was lost because inadequate ability to conscript. Would you agree with that?
Generally, yes.
Okay, so we have a lot of war data basically, and we don't think any wars have been lost because of lack of conscription. So it doesn't seem that your point that it's necessary really sticks, because if it was necessary, I think we have at least one example where it was actually necessary. Do you agree?
I've yet to see said example.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was kind of asking for, like an example of where war was lost, because that would support your point that it was necessary. If we had actually had a documented war that was lost for this reason, we could say, well, maybe it would have helped there, but we don't. So I don't think you can push the necessary component of your argument. I would argue this again, going back to conscription in World War II. We need a lot more data for you to say that the conscription rate on the U.S. side had much of an impact, or had it saved as many lives as it endangered. Frankly, we just don't have that data. We keep hearing like we think the ends justify the means, but do you have any data that actually proves the ends justify the means?
Any data that suggests that the ends justify the means, as in the ends of benefiting society?
Yeah, so like presumably drafting people or conscripting them will result in a like saving life in some way. I'm just curious if there's any proof of that, like just data points that you can point to that say, hey, here's an example of X people being drafted and X people being saved as a result.
All right, that's time. Neon, if you want to answer, you can use that at the beginning of your time. That's fine. But at this point, it'll be 3 minutes for Neon to ask his questions. I'll start the time on his first word.
Yeah, so I did want to touch back on something I asked you earlier, and I will answer your question at the very end, I promise. But I do want to touch on something real quick. You never actually answered my question. You said that if you have to conscript, the war is lost. Is that going to be like your final answer, or are you going to give me like a yes or no? This is sufficient reason to violate someone's liberties.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that back up because my point there wasn't that conscription automatically equals loss. That would be ridiculous. What I was saying is that if you, and here's the nuance, if you have to conscript a large deficit, and I'm talking about military size versus military size, not just like the raw number, because obviously 10 million is a lot, but is it a lot compared to the need? And so that's what I think needs to be proven. And obviously, yeah, conscription doesn't equal loss, but if you have like zero soldiers and they have 10 million and you conscript 10 million versus 10 million trained soldiers, you're obviously not favored to win the conflict.
If you okay, would you say that if we have an army with 10 million of these raping pillagers, this army that wants to torture and rape innocent civilians of our own people, would you say that if they have 10 million and we raise 20 million, even if it means forcing people, that this would be justified surely because we'll have more numbers and we are likely, it's more probable that we'll win?
I would argue that just based on World War II data of soldiers versus the meat grinder, is what they called it, more numbers doesn't necessarily mean anything. With modern warfare being able to actually decimate, it's actually a liability to put more bodies in one place these days.
Oh, that's not necessarily answering my question though.
Could you rephrase it? I'll try again.
Yeah. Do you believe that it's sufficient to raise a larger number of people, even if it means violating their liberties, because there might be a higher probability of winning a war against, say, raping and torturing, raping and torturing army?
Yeah, I'm going to say that's not justified because there's no certainty that raising X amount of troops necessarily is going to win you the war. Again, it could actually just endanger more people on the front lines.
If I propose to you that we know with relevant certainty that this army is going to win unless we can raise double their army and we have the means to do this, would you say that we ought not raise this number and allow for this army to come in, take over our country, and rape and torture our people?
So rather than thought experiments, I think we should just go with what's actually occurred or what's likely to occur. And I don't think we have an example of that in history or in the foreseeable future. So I don't think
Wait,
that's
that's just to be clear, I would like you to answer my question. And to clarify, we do actually have historical evidence of raping and torturing armies. I mean, we could talk about the rape of Nanking. We could talk about the I think it was the maybe not. I think it was the Mongolians or led or not. Sorry, not the Mongolian. Like Genghis Khan and his army did really atrocious things.
Sorry, that's
yeah.
the time. Sorry. So now would be another 2 minutes of optional prep time. Do you guys want it?
I don't need
I'll
it
defer
if
to
DJ
Neon.
wants it. Yeah, I don't need it.
Sorry, would you say DJ?
Yeah, I'm good to go. We're good.
Okay, great. So at this point, then would be 4 minute closing statements. For your closing statement, I just want you to tell me why you won. You know, weigh the points, whatever. So DJ will go first. He has 4 minutes. The time will start on your first word.
Thank you again. It really has been an interesting debate, and I'm glad for Neon showing up and asking me very interesting questions along the way. I don't think we've had time to really nuance all of the points adequately for anyone's benefit. However, I do think Neon was sort of coping there at the end about rape. I'm not sure why rape came up because, frankly, I think we could all argue that dropping a bomb on Hiroshima slightly more relevant than rape, and those are sort of modern day warfare. Yeah, there is some rape going on that's primarily into sort of like Eastern wars. It's not really that common. I mean, it does happen sadly, but if you compare the amount of casualties to rapes, it's pretty uncommon in modern warfare. Again, modern warfare sort of refutes his point that raising a bunch of numbers is going to somehow be good or even protect life, because frankly, we've seen factually in history that you can send 10,000 people against machine guns and it's literally a meat grinder. And so there's no modern day connection between strength of numbers and military force. Boots on the ground do matter, but you'll notice with global conflicts that they don't always matter the most. It's America that has superior air power that can suppress people who have weaker, militaries because of that. And then you've got the issue with Russia and their navy being weak and far away. And so it's not just brute numbers anymore. So frankly, conscription, I would argue, is sort of antiquated. We really need to sort of teach our citizens and sort of pluck the people who are most equipped to do things and most relevant and basically doing the jobs that we need them to do rather than just throwing bodies at the problem and hoping it works. That's definitely a thing of the past. I'd argue that I've provided some stats that were really helpful and informative, especially with the mental health things and personal liberty. I don't think I've heard any stats from Neon other than that one museum report, which is fine. But I'd like a little more objective basis from his side to just say, hey, like, here's some war data that actually proves conscription ever really helped objectively. We sort of think that conscription helps just because it's always been done. Obviously, my opponent in this debate admitted just because we've always done something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or bad.
I'm
It's
gonna
just something
pause
that
the
we've
time.
always
He
done.
said it cut out. Neon, can you hear? Are you there, Neon? Sorry, DJ.
Hello?
Not fine.
Are you good?
I'm good now. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. DJ, if you want to just repeat like the last 20 seconds or something, I paused the time, so you're good.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where my stream of consciousness was, to be honest, but um I do actually just wanted to see more. I was hoping to engage with more data from Neon's side because I did go through some metrics and Pew researches and things like that just to see like what are the numbers actually, because we all know this debate is ad hoc. Like I haven't studied this position for any length of time, but I was able to find some reports and some data that really um, frankly modified some of my own ideas. And so because I'm not going to tell you what I really believe here, but I think I've made a strong case for the injustice of conscription. I do think it's pretty obvious that it sparked protests and things in the Western nations that value personal liberty and built on natural law, things like that. And I do think it's interesting that only the most draconian nations actually require conscription with no allowance for conscientious objections whatsoever. So I just point to the widespread availability of conscientious objection as proof that all of the nations realize this is a matter of morality and justice, and they won't force someone against their will, unlike my opponent. And I yield my time.
Cool. Okay. Neon, you're gonna have a 4-minute closing statements. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also like to thank you, DJ, for the conversation. I agree we didn't have a whole lot of time, but maybe we can have this conversation more another time. But just to close out, we talk about the conscription and we talk about what should be the case as this moral quandary. I would say that it is good and it is just to force people to serve if it means protecting life in general. I agree with you on that. Generally, I view the positives to outweigh this liberty infringement. You also didn't engage with my reductio, which was to test your consistency by saying we should like focus on like real world. And I gave you 2 real world examples, and you didn't engage with that. That's fine if you don't want to. I just think it's interesting how you didn't engage with that. And then finally and foremost, I would say that conscription is good and it is just, especially when it comes to protecting our society, protecting our people. The consequences of not having conscription in the time of need can be dire. Armies coming in, taking our people, destroying our society, the downfall, the rape and torture. And I agree, rape is bad, but rape is bad is not a defeater for the principle I was testing. But with that, I yield my time.
Cool. Give me 1 second. Okay. I'm gonna go over my notes, but before I do, I just want to say you guys both did a good job. I'm proud of both of you. I enjoy both of you. So, good job to both of you. I just said both of you like 6 times. That was weird. Anyway, so let's start with DJ's side of the case because he went first. So he brought up first the risks and hazards of combat. He talked about loss of life and then mental health problems. Neon responded kind of to the mental health problem in across a little bit by saying that it varies. The cause of mental health problems could be attributed to other things, and that it was statistically insignificant. There wasn't much else on that argument. Then DJ talked about the personal liberty infringement. That'll come up later, but there wasn't like a direct response to it. Neon's point was just that the obligation and the negative of not having it outweighs the liberty infringement, but that'll come up later. DJ then talked about the gender disparity between women and men, but that didn't really have any impact on the debate. There wasn't a lot of discussion about it. And then he also brought up the lack of transparency between governments and citizens and explaining how the war is happening, and there wasn't a lot of discussion on that either. And then later he brought up how like governments that are super draconian, that they don't allow objections, and so that's like kind of a interesting thing. And then Neon brought up the example of Israel, that Israel is pretty high on the liberty scale, but they don't allow objections. And then that was just kind of it. DJ talked about bodily autonomy, and then Neon just kind of said he doesn't know if bodily autonomy exists, and then that was the end of that. And then DJ talked about that free countries tend to allow objections, and then Neon just kind of said like there was no correlation between like them being high on the freedom scale and then them also allowing objections. He's like, there are other factors. And then later in the debate, DJ brought up that conscripts tend to not be good soldiers or be reliable, and that it would be better to fight along people that were specially trained or volunteered. And I didn't really see a response to that. On Neon's side of the debate, he was talking about how conscription is necessary, that his main point was that not having it was a net negative, that the negative of not having it outweighs the liberty infringement. He talked about how we ought to value national security over liberty, and that the force required in war is a prerequisite to securing liberty, and that it protects life. And he kind of touched on the societal obligation, but that didn't really come up later in the debate, so there wasn't much to that. And then later he talked about how it could cause a more probable victory, and then DJ responded by saying that he disagrees it would be a more probable victory, that more bodies could kind of be a liability, but there was a lot of clash on that, so it didn't have too much impact. And yeah, Landon, I'll post them. So at the end of the day, it was a close debate, I think. But the main thing that I had an issue with was, so when Neon brought up that not having conscription would be a net negative, DJ kind of responded by saying, like, what is the net negative? Like, substantiate that. And then kind of at the very end, Neon was like, yeah, so if we don't have conscription, that, like, armies will be able to freely, like, take and control society. Like, I don't know, that doesn't, like, that's kind of assuming that there would be no army to like fight them back in the first place. Like DJ's point was kind of that even if we don't have conscription, that like there will still be an army because people still volunteer. There's lots of he was kind of at the end saying like the disparity between how many people were conscripted versus how many people were actually needed, or how many people just volunteered instead of being conscripted. So I think you both did very, very well, and I love both of you. But at the end, I voted for DJ just because I think just like all of the reasons that I gave before. But I think you both did a very good job, and Neon, you're still one of my best friends. So I appreciate you, and I love you both, and you both did great.
I'm biased, but I'm thankful for your ruling. I think Neon did a great job. And I had to overcome a best friend diff. I did not know that.
Yeah, you did.
I mean, this is just her telling you that she doesn't want to be friends anymore.
No, that's not true. I love being friends with Neon.
Well, this debate just cost you your friendship, so.
Neon, are we still friends? He says we're still friends. It's okay.
Yeah, that's
Neon
what they all
really,
say. We're still friends, but no, it's never the same.
And just for everyone else, this proves that I'm very objective and that I'm not biased. So suck it.
Well, you could have just wanted to break your friendship, and that's why you did
Oh
this.
my god. Oh my god. Julian, go away. Julian, go away.
Look, I'm not going. I survived the gaslighting once. You know, they tried to kill us during the Holocaust. I'm not being gaslit again.
Julian, didn't I vote for your win during your
Yep.
debate?
Yeah.
So what's your point?
My problem is you just stabbed your best friend in the back. Now,
I didn't stab him in the
personally,
back.
if I
did a
was your
good
best
job.
friend, if I was your best friend, I'd be blocking you.
Oh my
I'd send
god.
you death threats on my ult account. But looks like Nina's doing none of these things.
Oh my god. Yeah, I think Landon wanted me to post my notes. So if you want, I'll post it. Give me a second. But you guys did such a good job. I said notes, Seth. Get your mind out of the gutter, idiot. Yeah, if you guys want to talk about it, I'm gonna go to VC so that we can open up stuff. But